Okay, hopefully in this video you can learn something about oil filters and it will help you make a comparison on which oil filter to buy for your vehicle or application. All applications are going to be different. This video, all these filters are for my 2009 Ford Crown Victoria Police Interceptor. It's got the 4.6 liter modular Ford engine. It's a common filter used on several Ford engines as well as other vehicles. And the reason I bought all these filters for the same application is so you can, it's an apples to apples comparison between the manufacturers. With the different manufacturers, some of the stuff we're going to look at is with the differences. The manufacturers also have differences over time. I had filters like this several years ago. You cut them open and then you cut the same filters open now. Things have changed. Designs of either manufacturers try to cut cost or improve their filter, or there's always changes. Plus brands like K&N is one example that the Champ Labs made their filters, then they went to a Korean manufacturer, and then now, at least in my application, it's back to being a Champ Labs filter. So you get to see that and exactly what's going on in the filters. It's 2018 currently, and just there's several videos on YouTube that just not that long ago there's been changes. So this is a rundown of what's out there. This is for my vehicle. This is everything I would use on my own vehicle as far as these are all mid to upper grade filters. And it's kind of when I'm deciding what filter to use, it's out of these filters and possibly a few others. But you start to form opinions, and for different people, different opinions form. Like some people like flowing filters, some people like where the bypass location is, the burst strength of the can, anti-drain back valves. I mean, everybody will hone in and pick up on what they like. So for those that don't know how an oil filter works, I'll show you that too. So looking at this Mobil one, it's pretty much your probably the most common design. It's a simple design to show you how it works. So all filters are going to have a base plate. This is the part of the filter that screws into your engine. So when the filter is put together, it looks something like this. And when it's screwed onto the engine, the oil will flow in through these outer holes. Then it will go into the filter, go through the filter media, and then come back out the center hole. And the first thing the oil comes to when it comes into the oil filter is an anti-drain back valve. So this is going to be pushed in here under pressure, and it's going to sit here. And as the oil flows in, it's going to force this lip up, and then oil is going to flow into the filter. The purpose of the anti-drain back valve is exactly like it says. It's keeping oil in the filter from draining back into the system. And this is depending on how your filter's mounted on your engine, it may have a greater impact on your application or a different application. So on top of the anti-drain back valve, you have your media. This is what's actually doing the filtering. And so this is sitting here. So the oil comes in, goes through the filter, the filter media, and then out the center. So then on top of here, you have the bypass valve. So say you get into your car, it's minus 20. You live in northern Wisconsin, middle of winter, and you have a 10W30, a thick oil in your car. So you crank it up. Well, with that thick oil, if it can't make it through the filter, you don't want to starve the engine of oil. So the bypass valve will open and your engine will get oil. Another time that the bypass may be used is if the filter ever clogged up. If you didn't do an oil change for 50,000 miles and it's starting to clog up, the bypass may open. Generally, when the bypass opens in a cold condition, It may only be open for a few seconds, depending on the design of your engine, what oil. There's several factors, but pretty much this is only going to open in cold temperatures, at high RPM when you're pumping a lot of oil, race applications, and oil can't get through the media quick enough. There's a restriction, so this is a safety mechanism in your filter, so oil that can't get through the media will go through the bypass. So next piece, generally you have a spring. It can be a leaf spring that's common, or a coil spring. And these, all they do is they can compress the filter. It's what keeps all the guts together and keeps your filter like it should be. It keeps your anti-drain back valve and everything in place to form a good tight seal to operate normally. So one thing I like in my filters that I will not use a filter that doesn't have, it's these anti-drain back valves. These are all silicone anti-drain back valves. They can be different colors. Usually they are orange, royal purple. There's a purple. They're silicone. I've seen other manufacturers make different filter anti-drain back valves. Generally, nitrile rubber anti-drain back valves are black. I don't like those. The reason being, they don't generally seal too well. They may seal initially, but when your engine goes through several heat cycles after running on and off, on and off, on and off, they get hard and they don't seal. And a lot of times when you change an oil filter on a vehicle and you turn that oil filter upside down, oil escapes. The filter allows that oil to run out because the anti-drain back valve doesn't work too well. And one example where that comes into place, with Ford's engines like mine, the 4.6, if your anti-drain back valve doesn't work, oil will go back into the sump and oil will leave parts of the engines. On the 4.6, it's the hydraulic lifters in the engine, and those lifters, they fill up with oil, and when you start your car, there shouldn't be a sound. But if you have a weak or a bad anti-drain back valve, that oil will run back through the filter and your engine will go dry in those lifters, and when you start your car, it's common to have a ticking sound until those lifters pump back up with oil and dampen that sound. So a lot of times it's common for Ford dealers, if people complain of that, they usually, the person's not using a Motorcraft filter, they recommend a Motorcraft filter. And the reason being is the anti-drain back valve has that good seal and will keep that oil up there in the upper parts of the engine in the lifters and quiet it down. So all these filters I have here, and for me it's a must, have the silicone anti-drain back valve. Another common thing that you see debated a lot is the location of the bypass valve. And on the Mobil one, on the Wix, and on the Fram, and sometimes in the different companies, like Wix, the Wix and the Napa Gold are the same exact filter, different sticker. Same thing with the Napa Platinum and the Wix XP. Same filter, different stickers. Well, usually the Wix has a, I'm getting all over the place here, but Wix commonly has a thread end bypass valve. And that's like this Motorcraft for Fords. So what this is when this is put together, when your oil's starting, when your oil filter is starting to starve your engine of oil because of restriction, instead of having the bypass on top of the filter, on the dome end of the filter, oil will come in, go around the anti-drain back valve, and then go through these holes and press this spring in here to open this valve to allow water through, or oil through. So you've got the oil coming in, the filter, and if it can't make it through the media, it will just go through these holes and back out. So yes, that unfiltered oil is going back to your engine, but it's not going across the dirty media in your filter. And that's an argument a lot of people have, and why they prefer a bypass valve on the thread end of the bypass or the filter. And for Ford applications, a lot of times the theory is your oil filter is mounted upside down or on the side, something like this, 45-degree angle or so, and you have dirt that settles in the bottom of the can. And so you don't want oil to come in and then run by and pick up that dirt and go through a bypass that's on the dome side. You prefer it to go through the thread side bypass. There's a lot of people that say that doesn't matter. And probably the most common is to have the bypass on the dome end of the can. And some logic behind there is you always have oil pressure on the media. So it's not like once this bypass opens, oil stops flowing through the media. No, you generally have constant flow pressed up against the media, so different oil is going to go through the bypass. And the amount of time and how infrequent the bypass is open makes it irrelevant, because it's not like you're sending all your oil through the bypass. It's only going through the bypass if you have a major restriction on the media, which rarely happens. But even with the bypass, there's some differences. With the Fram, you have this design. It's a nylon based. It feels like plastic, but this sits on top here, and if the pressure's too great, the bypass operates like this. The Wix and the Mobil 1 have the same type. You've got this spring in the center, and it opens. It's under pressure. The Wix is more of like a cardboard or a felt type plunger in there, where the Mobil 1 has a rubber, which looks like it seals pretty good. I mean, they both are tight. There's no gaps. I believe they both will seal well. And in these applications, that's one thing to compare with filters. On the Motorcraft, the amount of pressure it takes to open the bypass is 16 psi. On the Wix, it takes 22 psi, and on the Fram, it takes 12 psi. And then on this Mobil 1, I couldn't find the exact specification, but Royal Purple, which is also made by Champ Labs, generally these two filters are very much in common. Royal Purple says it takes 11 to 17 psi, and a lot of times the filter companies give a range like that. So that I'm assuming this is probably pretty close to the Royal Purple at 11 to 17 psi. And so there's different ways of thinking about that. With me, I like how Wix has a 22 psi. That's going to depend on your vehicle and application. A lot of things go into it. But in my mind, with a higher bypass valve setting, there's less of a chance of that bypass opening. The oil is going to keep going through the filter media until the pressure differential in that filter reaches 22 psi. And that's another topic. People don't understand the bypass psi when it comes into effect. It's not, if your car's running a 40 psi oil pressure, that's not going to make your bypass open. It's the delta P, it's the pressure differential over the media. So say you have a pressure of 40 on the outside, and then the oil pressure on the outgoing side of the filter is 20. There's 20 psi difference. That's what your bypass is looking at. It's the difference of the pressure from the outside of the filter to the inside of the filter. So in my mind, like I said, a higher one makes more sense. But some other things you have to look at, and probably the filter engineers have taken into account, is how well that filter flows and the dynamics of that filter. Because as you change the flowing dynamics of the filter media, it's going to change how important and what PSI value your bypass is operating at. So I don't think it's as clear as always going with the highest PSI. So let's look at these filters individually. The first one being the Mobil one, I already showed you a second ago, and I'll provide my comments on it. It's got a heavy base plate. I mean, it's a thick, solid, heavy base plate. I really like their anti-drain back valves. They're well made. They seem thicker than some of the others. I like how they sit in. I like how they have the ring that presses that down and really seals that anti-drain back valve. The leaf spring in this filter seems to be fine, and the cans seem to be thick. It's one of the thicker cans in these filters. The media, if you look at the part number for this, it's M1-210A. They just added the A recently, and I guess the spec on this filter has changed. Now they claim 99% efficiency at filtering 30 microns or above. Used to, I think that was 20 microns. So one thing I ran across is that they lowered the filter efficiency on the filtering side, so they could, instead of 15,000 miles, they could get you the 20,000. So the logic behind that is if it filters better in that longer time span, it could clog up, and then you go into bypass and your filter is not worth a hoot if it's not filtering very well. Well, with lowering the filter efficiencies, you can drive it longer or keep it in service longer without that filter filling up. And one thing, this isn't scientific, but in the color, a lot of stuff has to do with interfering with this. But one thing I like to do is take this, it's a pretty bright flashlight, and shine it through it, and you can kind of see how much light is coming through the filter. And I did that for some comparisons to give an idea on how dense or thick that filter media is. I think the Mobil 1 filter has good build quality. It's one of the upper level Champ laboratory manufactured filters. The spacing on the pleats looks really good. There's no large spaces. The pleating is centered in the upper and lower metal end caps. Like I said, the rubber bypass valve, I think, seals up fine. It's not sloppy. It just seems well built. Leaf spring seems to be fine. Like I said, thick can. I think it's good to go. I like it. The other thing this is actually from a Toyota, this filter. But when I've had the Royal Purple filters, the reason I have this here is the Royal Purple filters looked identical to the Mobil 1 filters, other than they had this same, this is a Toyota TDR factory filter. The Mobil 1 had this same synthetic media. Now the thing with synthetic media is with these filters, this is cellulose. This is a paper product. This is a paper media. And these three filters, the Motorcraft, the Napa Gold, the Wix, the Mobil 1, these three that I have here are enhanced. So sometimes you will see strings off here, but they take the paper and they have strings of resin that have some of the qualities of the synthetic, but it's not completely synthetic. It probably gives the paper more rigidity for the longer service. And so if you look at the paper filters under a microscope, you will see that it's very irregular. You've got smaller holes, bigger holes. I mean, it's like cutting down a tree. I mean, it's and looking under plant fibers under a microscope. It's just very irregular. So that's why the filtering generally isn't as consistent. Well, on the synthetic media, generally you have very uniform, smaller voids, and it's thicker. So on the paper media, you get basically one layer, and as the debris and particles go through, it gets trapped by that media, and then the clean oil comes through the other side. With the synthetic, if you could zoom in on it, it's a lot thicker than the paper. So it can hold more dirt, because some of the dirt goes in, it gets almost to where it's coming out and gets trapped. And as that builds up, or different intervals, oil gets caught, or dirt in the oil gets caught in that three-dimensional space versus just having that one plane. So it can hold more dirt. So your benefit of synthetics generally are they flow better than paper, and they're less affected by moisture in the oil. So if you do a lot of short trips, they flow better. They can also hold more dirt. But a lot of times they don't initially filter, generally speaking, as fine as a lot of these enhanced paper filters. But there is an exception to that. And we'll get there in a little bit. But just for, I was telling you, the Mobil 1 for filtration is 99% at 30 microns. This TDR, which I'm going off, like I said, it looks the same as the Royal Purple. Royal Purple has the specs on this as being 99% at 25 microns, 98.7% at 20 microns, and 80% at 10 microns is what this material in this, basically in this style Mobil 1 filter will do. So then as we look at the Motorcraft, going down the line, you can tell this filter is made by Purelator. If you look at a Purelator, this is a dead giveaway. They've got this oval inlet holes, and this is typical of a Motorcraft filter. Usually their anti-drain back valves have the Ford Motor Company on the anti-drain back valve itself. So this I think is the ugliest media we have here, and if you look, it's a little thicker probably than the Wix. We get there in a second. It's probably close to the thickness of the Mobil 1, but the spacing isn't very good. And this is a common report you see. And usually the problem is right here where the joint is, and this is glued together, you get these wide pleats. And this has been an issue. And this is also an issue with some Purelators here recently. But because this gets wide, as this is in service, you have oil pressure pressing on this. And then instead of this pleat having the strength like these narrow ones, it's like if you had a piece of plywood. If you tried to punch the side of the piece of plywood, you're not going to do anything with it. But if you punch, or the edge, if you punch the side of it, broadside, you know, with a hammer or something, you're liable to punch through it. And that's the same thing here, is the force being exerted on this media in these wider pleats here has been tearing some of these. And usually they tear right where the media is glued to the end plates, here and here. So, and another thing is I've noticed is some of the spacing in the end caps isn't even. Here you've got media up against the side. Here you've got at least 1/8 of an inch off the side, so it's not very symmetrical. But the positive I say with this filter is you've got the bypass valve on the thread end. So putting this filter together, and this filter also, when I open it up, had a lot of loose glue all around it. This is glue that holds the media in, and it was just coming off. They had it all over the place. It was on the bottom, the top. It was the sloppiest filter that I've opened recently. But they've got the leaf spring spring that holds the filter tension in this filter, and it's an average thickness can as far as just squeezing it, being able to fill it. And then Wix. This keep calling it a Wix. It's a Napa Gold, same filter. So again, silicone anti-drain back valve. Again, all these filters so far have the end cap that has the protruding surface that really fits down into the anti-drain back valve and helps form that tight seal on the anti-drain back valve. And that's something I like. The Wix is sit in its end caps very well, very uniform. As you spin it, the pleats are very good. There's not a gap. The only thing I think of when I look at this pleating is just with the naked eye, the media looks very thin to me. I mean, not scary thin, not where I don't think it would work, but it just doesn't look. I mean, I can tell just by looking at it. I mean, I can't say that because I'm not testing it, but just with the naked eye, it doesn't look like it would filter as well as some of these thicker medias. So according to Wix, they filter at 95% at 25 microns or 50% at 12 microns. So that's and also looking back, jumping back to the Motorcraft, they filter, and this is coming from a test that Amsoil did, and they tested the Motorcraft at 93.7% at 20 microns. So the Wix isn't the best filtering. I would say it flows very well. I would say it's a good all-around filter. Now, one difference that Wix has that I really like is the spiral spring, the coil spring. And the reason I like it is this filter, as far as tension goes in the filter, it was obvious. When you cut it apart, you can see that gap. There was a lot of tension there, and when you cut it, it separated. Like it wanted to jump apart. I'd say it's got a pretty decent average can, but I like that spring tension because I like it holding that anti-drain back valve and everything in place. It's very well built. Let me get the flashlight, and I'm going to show you these two filters under the light, and you can see how bright that is in the Wix. Another thing, I think it's a fine filter, but I don't think it's going to filter as well as some of the other filters. And now going to the Motorcraft, let's take a look at it. It's about like the Wix. You can see it down in there. It's not as bright as the Wix, but it's I would say the Motorcraft looks a little thicker. But yeah, the Wix I would say is on the lighter side of the filtration out of the filters I have here. So kind of a different animal that I think is more different than the other ones I have here is the Fram Ultra. I'm not a big Fram person, or I haven't been, and some reasons why. So here's their base plate. It's pretty much like any other base plate here. Here's their anti-drain back valve. Now what's different here, this is probably my biggest issue with the Fram, is like how these other ones, they have this protruding metal that really seals. There's no question that this oil's not getting from the clean side to the dirty side. On this, how this anti-drain back valve seals in the filter, it just fits in there. That's fine. And when it's under tension, this fits over here and it seals the anti-drain back valve. Okay, well, if you look here and look close, you have this anti-drain back valve material is just sitting right here on this surface. And some of these inlets that carry your dirty oil in, it's so close because you have dirty oil right here going, or sorry, your dirty oil's coming in, your clean oil's going out, and the only thing that separates them is this anti-drain back valve that's just resting on this space that looks to be in some places to be a 16th of an inch or less, and some of these holes are right there by it. So that's my biggest question right now with these. But the filter media, this is probably the most impressive filter media as far as quality out here. The filter media is centered in the end caps. The gluing is not messy, but it looks like it's plenty to make a good seal. You've got the metal crimp. The spacing is okay. Some areas it gets thicker, but just the mass of the filter material, it just looks thick, it feels thick. The holes in the inner tube, they're evenly spaced, and when you hold a light to this, I mean, it's much dimmer than the other ones. I'm not saying it doesn't flow, but to me it just seems much more. I would think this filter does have some higher filter ratings as far as its ability to filter. It's rated at 99% at 20 microns, but just looking at it, it looks like it would. It's much more substantial in the filter media department. So it like I know you can't look at this and tell, hey, that filter is better than you know. You need some testing equipment that no one's going to have on the street, but it just comes across that way. Also, the bottom of, going back to this issue I have with the anti-drain back valve, there's really nothing that centers this or holds it in place other than the media sitting on top of it. Well, that's kind of what these do. These ridges that are built into this base plate, when everything fits over, these kind of hold the outer edges of the can and center it. So, and I've pressed it up, and I don't think it takes a lot of pressure, and I think it does seal fine. I'm sure engineers, if it didn't seal, they would change it. It's just, I get more reassurance with that actual metal pressing up and sealing that anti-drain back valve. And but it's still a tight space in here. I'm sure this filter flows fine, but if you take a toothpick and you push this open, it doesn't have much room in there to move. I mean, they're just slightly opening. I'm sure it doesn't starve an engine. but it's a tight space in there. Whereas if you use like the Mobil 1, you open that up, you push that, I mean, it really opens up. I mean, you've got full flow there. So it just, that's my weak link on my criticism of the Fram Ultra. Realistically, I'm sure engineers have looked at it and there's no issue whatsoever. And by their design with not having that lip, if you look at all the filters out here, they're able to get more filter media in their filters. Their filter, the part of the filter that's actually filtering, is taller than all the other filters here. So that's something to consider. And here's moving forward, their anti-drain back valve sits on this felt-like sealing material, which I thought that's a nice touch. Sometimes you just see metal on metal. The fact that the engineers put in this to seal it made me think, you know, they're pretty thorough. They know what they're doing. Just like any of these companies, I'm sure they know what they're doing. And this leaf spring is what condenses this filter and keeps it all together. And I will add, part of my issues with this is the Fram has a fairly thin can. Like when you cut it open, this one it cuts open way easier than the others with the filter cutting tool that I have. And I think Frams are known for the thinner can. In service, I don't think that makes any difference, other than if you drop this or if something hits this can, it's more likely to bend. Normally that wouldn't be an issue. But there was a reported case on bobistheoilguy.com, it's been a while, I believe a few years ago, that when the guy changed the oil and took the filter off, his filter, it was rattling. And this stuff was in his can loose, rattling around. And in my mind, well, I know if you take the tension off this filter, the dirty and clean oil are not going to seal, because this has to have that tension. And I noticed, I just thought it was ironic, when I picked this can up from Walmart, the woman literally turned and just dropped it in the bag. And I was thinking, oh great, because going back to that story, he sent it back into Fram, and what Fram determined was there was a dent under this black surface in the can that the user, I guess, didn't notice. I didn't see the picture. I don't know how bad the dent was. But because this got dented, it took the pressure off the leaf spring, so the parts of the filter that held the filter tight and together and allowed it to do the sealing and allowed the filter to function as it's meant to function, with that dent in there, it relieved the pressure on the leaf spring. The filter couldn't do its job. So that's one thing that concerns me. Do I think that's going to happen every time? No. Do I think that's going to happen 1% of the time? No. I think it's a fluke. But I know if that was on my car and I took this filter off and the can's rattling, or it's rattling around, it's going to bother me. So enough of that. Moving down, this is another Wix filter. It's the Wix XP, or the Platinum Napa filter. It's just like the other Wix. You've got a silicone anti-drain back valve. But this one, with the synthetic media on the Wix filter, they've changed the can a little, or the end caps a little. This one has the same anti-drain back valve, set at 22. The bypass set at 22 psi. But the bottom end plate's different. They have this insert. This is where you don't have, like I was talking about, the Fram has the felt seal. I don't think you're going to have a lot of oil seeping through here, but it is metal on metal. And this fits into your anti-drain back valve, and it does form a good seal right there. On top, you have the same coil spring, and then you've got the same average filter coil spring, providing a lot of spring pressure to keep the filter nice and tight. And I found it interesting that Fram, on their heavy duty filters, they use a coil spring. So I thought that was interesting because they're I don't know, to me that's you know, there's probably a reason for that. But anyway, the thing about this can, I was really unimpressed with this. It is so sloppy. If you look at it, it's not even level. If you set the bottom level, the top part's at an angle. The pleats aren't at all centered in the caps. Here they're next to the edge. Here there's a gap. The bottom cap is better. The spacing's okay. The synthetic media, though, is very thin. The media you have in the TRD filters or the Royal Purple filters is quite a bit thicker. They look the same, but the Royal Purple is definitely thicker. And the Fram Ultra is definitely thicker. Now, the synthetic filters, all of these three, they all have the wire mesh backing. And if you shine the flashlight on this, I mean, the light comes right through. I mean, that's obvious. It's white. It's more of a transparent color. But this filter, right now I don't believe Wix is giving the filter efficiency information out. But they used to, and they used to say it was rated for 50% at, it was either 20 or 25 microns, which isn't that good for filtration. But it's gonna, if that's the case, I would say it probably flows a little better than some of the others. So my takeaway, what do I think? I really like the Fram. I want to like the Fram. I think Fram's got the, out of these, hands down, the best filter media. And I like how it's centered, the design, everything like that. I wish they made the case a little thicker, so if the lady at Walmart does drop it in the bag, you know, it keeps me from worrying about if she dented it or not, or if the whole time I'm driving my car for the next 10,000 miles, if you know, if my filter's rattling around, or the guts of it are in the filter. I'm not a big fan of how the anti-drain back valve seals in the Fram. I like the idea on Motorcraft of the anti-drain back, the bypass valve. I like that it's on the thread end. I've always liked, I would say before, just going back 10, 15 years, maybe longer, I always liked Champ Labs, their filters. The makers, they make the Mobil 1, they make Royal Purple, they're higher end filters like that. They make the K&N. I always thought their filters were put together well. I like the thick cases, I like the thick bases, I like the quality of everything in it. I like their anti-drain back valve. But on this Mobil 1, I'm not wild about, I feel like the filtrations drop some. With Motorcraft, with the tears they've been seeing lately, that's a big issue with me. With the spacing, the filtering ability of this filter, with the sloppy glue, I'm not a big Purelator fan right now, and I think the Motorcraft filter has issues. Wix. I like Wix. I think Wix is a good everyday filter. Wix has a gazillion applications. If you have a tractor, a semi, equipment, just everything, Wix has a huge range of products they make. I would run a Wix in everything. I don't think you're getting the finest filtration with them, but I think it's good. It's serviceable. It's it's a very good general filter. I love the coil spring in it. I love the tight compression of all the guts inside the filter. I was disappointed in the Wix XP or the Napa Platinum. To me, the filter media, then it needs to be thicker. Just going off of what they once published, going off of just looking at it, the quality control there sucks. To me, I'd rather have a Wix or the Napa Gold over the XP, just because I think it's probably going to filter better, and I don't think there's any flow issues with the Wix or the Napa Gold. I mean, right now I could buy any of them. Right now, if I was gonna go out and buy something for my car, even though I've got some issues with it, I would like to give the Fram Ultra a try. And so now it's probably between it and the Royal Purple. I really like the Champ Labs filter design, and I like the Royal Purple media. So if you've got any questions or want me to take a look at any other filters, you know, you can post a question. I can try to find that filter or whatever. So thanks for watching.